All right, today we're doing something a little different. We're going to break down one of the most incredible missions of World War II, the Doolittle Raid, and we're going to do it through a really cool lens, the lyrics of the Histrocore song that tells its story. So we're going to follow along, verse by verse, and really dig into the history behind the music.
So this song just kicks right in with this doop-doop-de-doo, this really driving beat, and it's perfect, right? It's not just the energy of a metal song. It really captures that frantic, desperate urgency of the mission itself. And then you hear that chant, do little damage. It's such a clever play on words, because this raid was never really about destruction. It was all about sending a message. And boom, right there, that's the main idea of this whole explainer. It comes straight from the song's chorus. Only few bombs, but their impact was great. I mean, that one line just perfectly sums up the whole paradox of the Doolittle Raid. The physical damage, yeah, pretty small, but the psychological shockwave, whoa, it completely changed the direction of the war in the Pacific. So let's get into exactly how.
Okay, so the first verse, it gets right to the point, lays out the motivation crystal clear, to hit Japan and to strike back, a revenge for their surprise attack. Look, this wasn't some complex strategic objective, not in the usual sense. This was personal. This was all about payback for Pearl Harbor.
So, what are we actually talking about here? The Doolittle Raid happened on April 18, 1942. That's just a little over 4 months after the absolutely devastating attack on Pearl Harbor. This raid was America's first defiant counterpunch. It was a direct hit on the Japanese homeland, something the Japanese leadership had told their people was totally impossible.
And you know, the guy who led the raid, Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle, he said it himself. American morale was at rock bottom in early '42. President Roosevelt knew, he absolutely knew, the country needed a win, even if it was just a symbolic one. Anything to show the world and ourselves that we were still in the fight. The real target here wasn't a factory, it was the American spirit.
So here's the big question. How do you even begin to attack Tokyo when all your forward bases in the Pacific are just gone? Well, this is where the plan goes from feeling kind of desperate to being downright genius. The idea was to try something that had literally never been done before. Launch big Army bombers off a Navy aircraft carrier.
And the song nails it. From the USS Hornet, 16 bombers flew. We're talking 16 B-25 Mitchell medium bombers. Now you gotta understand, these planes were designed to take off from long, comfortable runways. Instead, they were crammed onto the deck of an aircraft carrier. Every single one was stripped down, loaded with extra fuel. I mean, a lot of people thought this was just a straight-up suicide run.
And just think about the physics of this for a second. A B-25 normally needs, a few thousand feet of runway to get airborne. Doolittle, in the very first plane, had just 467 feet, and that's on a carrier deck that's pitching and rolling in the middle of the ocean. The fact that all 16 of those planes actually got into the air is just an unbelievable feat of flying skill.
So yeah, here's the absolute crucial point. This was always, from the very beginning, a one-way trip. Those B-25s, they could take off from the carrier, but there was no way they could ever land back on it. They were just way too big, way too heavy. So the plan was, hit their targets, and then just keep flying, hopefully to friendly airfields in China.
And this lays it all out, right? The three main parts of this incredibly risky mission. First, you've got that seemingly impossible launch from the USS Hornet. Second, you fly right into the heart of the enemy empire to bomb targets in places like Tokyo, Kobe, and Nagoya. And then, Phase 3. A long, long flight over the East China Sea, running on fumes, flying into the dark, and just praying you can find a friendly airfield in China.
Okay, let's get back to the course, because this is where it all comes together. Because the lesson that they teach it was that your homeland can be reached. This line, this gets right to the absolute heart of the raid's true impact. It wasn't about the bombs themselves. It was about the message they delivered. And I mean, just look at the difference here. The actual material damage, pretty minimal, almost nothing really. A few factories got hit, and sadly around 50 people were killed. But the psychological impact? Oh, it was massive. For the Allies, it was a total shot of adrenaline. But for Japan, it completely shattered their myth of being invincible. It planted real fear and doubt deep inside their military command. And you know, the American leadership, they played this up perfectly. When reporters asked President Roosevelt where the bombers came from, he just gave this little smirk and said they came from Shangri-La, you know, that fictional, mythical paradise. This totally mysterious answer just pumped up American morale even more, and it completely confused and infuriated the Japanese.
But the song,
it doesn't shy away from the human cost of all this. The next verse is a really somber reminder. For this attack, the men risked their lives, and some of them made a great sacrifice. And it's so important to remember that this sacrifice wasn't just paid by the American airmen.
Now, the song's lyric says 69 of the 80 survived. Some historical records have slightly different numbers, but the point is exactly the same. Not everyone made it home. Out of the 80 men who took off from that carrier, a lot of them faced this absolutely harrowing ordeal after dropping their bombs. See, they had to launch earlier than planned, which meant most of them ran out of fuel over China, right in the middle of a storm at night.
So here's the breakdown of what happened to those 80 raiders. 3 men were killed in action, either in their crash landings or when they had to bail out. 8 men were actually captured by Japanese forces, and the remaining 69? Well, with a whole lot of help from the Chinese people, they eventually made it back to Allied lines.
And the fate of those 8 prisoners, it was just horrific. They were tortured, they were put on a sham trial, and 3 of them were executed as war criminals. A 4th man died of disease and starvation in captivity. It's just a grim, grim testament to that great sacrifice the song talks about.
But you know, the greatest sacrifice of all might have been paid by Chinese civilians. In retaliation, as revenge for helping the American flyers escape, the Japanese army launched this absolutely brutal campaign. They slaughtered an estimated 10,000 civilians in the areas where the raiders had landed. It was a devastating, heartbreaking price to pay for their courage and their humanity.
And finally, the song points us to the raid's most significant and maybe even unintended strategic consequence. This little attack didn't win the war on its own, not even close. But what it did do was directly set the stage for the battle that would absolutely turn the tide.
So this is the chain reaction, the road to Midway. First, the Doolittle Raid shatters Japan's sense of being untouchable. That humiliation makes the Japanese Navy obsessed with one thing: finding and destroying the American carriers. So, they come up with a plan to lure the U.S. fleet into a trap at a place called Midway. But this leads directly to the decisive Battle of Midway, where the U.S. Navy, having cracked their codes, was waiting for them. The battle was a catastrophic, war-changing defeat for Japan.
And that brings us right back to where we started, to that one core idea. Only few bombs, but their impact was great. The Doolittle Raid dropped a tiny number of bombs, relatively speaking, but its impact on American morale, on Japanese psychology, and most importantly, on the strategic blunders that led them to Midway, well, that impact was just immeasurable.
So it really leaves you with a final, pretty deep question, right? When is the psychological hit of an attack actually more important than the physical destruction? The story of the Doolittle Raid, which is captured so well in that song, is just a powerful reminder that in war, sometimes the most important targets aren't buildings or factories. They're the hearts and minds of the people on both sides of the fight.